All right, well, I tell you what, we've got enough people here. We're going to start talking about the karmic path. You know, I do a lot of consultations each week. I do one level of consultation, which I actually two different levels. They're the tier 1 and tier 2 services that I offer through my website. And both of those have a karmic implications analysis in the actual consultation. And when I do the karmic analysis, I always like to do that first. Even though the individual has other questions that they're coming to me with, I always like doing that first, because you're going to find pretty much 9.9 times out of 10 that the reason that that person is asking those particular questions is because of what's going on with the karmic implications in their chart. Because we all encounter hardship of one way, shape, form, or another, right? On a certain level, it's how we relate to that hardship, how we face that hardship, how we apply our awareness to that hardship in order to make the most of the situation. So if everybody will please pardon me, I'm not going to answer questions right now. I'm more so going to talk about karma, because I think it's something that we need to understand. You know, because going back into that again, I have also found that in a lot of the cases of people who come to me as an astrologer, it's very focused on prediction. They want to know what's going to happen. What's going to happen with career? When am I going to get married? Am I going to move abroad? All sorts of questions like that. Really, underneath it all, what is everybody asking? They just want to know when they're going to be happy. That's all that people really want to know at the root of it. But they're identifying happiness with something that's external to them, right? And happiness isn't out there. It's not going to be out there. It's going to be inside of you. So really, the most important thing that you can do in terms of your chart is to understand the karmic implications in your chart and really bring your attention to focus on that. Because if you're focusing on that first, it's not going to matter to you when you're going to get married. Hey there, back again. It may have frozen for a moment or two, so I'm hoping it's back again. The internet kind of cut out. But what I was saying is it's not going to matter to you if you're dealing with the karma in your chart. If you're focusing on that, it's not going to be as important to you if you're going to get married. It's not going to be as important to you the amount of income that you're going to have, or if you found a job. What's going to be important to you is the fact that you're actually finding happiness, because you understand what the problem is, and you understand the root of the problem and why you're experiencing certain things. And that's why the nodes are so very important in astrology. I think if, as an astrologer, you're just looking at people's predictive questions and what they want to know about things, and you're not looking at the karma that's underneath that, then you're only going to be dealing with a symptom that the person is having. Sure, treating a symptom is very important, right? But underneath that symptom is a problem. It's a deeper rooted thing, and that thing is the individual's karma and their inability to really understand what they're actually going through, why they're having the hard times, why they're constantly coming up against resistance, why they're not getting married, why they're not finding a job, why they're not finding material happiness. All of those things are going to tie in to the karmic implications. But again, what's much more important is the fact that the individual is happy with themselves, and that is the karmic implication. So for those of you who aren't familiar with my astrological services, there is a link above on the page. The Book Now section will take you to my astrological services page if you want to book with me. But back talking about the karmic implications for a little bit. So let's take a look at the nodes, right? And a lot of you who have heard me rant on and off for a really long time know the kind of spiel that I usually give about the nodes, but I think it's really important to understand, and I'm going to give it a little more, try to give it a little more deeply today, right? Sometimes I get babbling and then I kind of lose the point, because I'm human, right? I'm not perfect, in case you thought I was perfect. There's no halo above the head, right? I am drinking tea. I have a cup of coffee every morning. I'm not perfect. I'm perfect in the fact that I make a good cup of coffee, though. But back to the concept at hand. Let's talk about Rahu and Ketu. Rahu and Ketu are the planetary army, right? Ketu represents the territory that's already been captured. It's the things that we're most familiar with. We place a flag, which Ketu means flag. We place a flag on that territory to mark that territory. We know the way the land lays. We know how things tend to function. We know how things work. We have a good insight, a good understanding of it, because it's something that we've dealt with before. But imagine if imagine you've got a kingdom and you've captured this piece of land, right? So you've got this piece of land and you've got this fortress, but you can't leave that fortress. You're just stuck there. Now, what good is that going to be? You're not going to see the world. You're not going to know anything else other than that one piece of land that you've got. So that's how Ketu becomes limited. Ketu gives us a strong foundation in something. It gives us a deep understanding, something that we're familiar with. But just because we're familiar with something, it doesn't mean that it's good. We can be familiar with pain, right? Oh, I've been through this stuff before. I've been, kind of going through pain for a really long time, and I'm very familiar with pain. We can be familiar with that. But what we really want is to expand beyond that, isn't it? So Ketu represents something that we know, something that we're comfortable with. And that's why Ketu ties in with past lives as well. Because the reason we're so comfortable with something is because we have done it for many, many lifetimes, right? So a lot of times people like to say Ketu represents the previous life. Well, really, I think in a lot of cases it represents previous lifetimes. It's how you've gotten to where you are. So then Rahu's job is to capture new territory, explore new territory. Why is he exploring that new territory? So he can build upon the kingdom. So he can build upon Ketu. And that's why Rahu and Ketu are one and the same, right? They're split in two. We experience the duality of them, but they're one and the same. Rahu is exploring fresh territory so he can bring things back to the understanding of Ketu. But Rahu is going to represent those things that we're not familiar with, right? Those things that confuse the hell out of us. He's going to represent all those areas that we don't know inside of ourselves. And because we don't know them, we have no choice but to project it out onto the world around us. And that's why if you're in Rahu Dasha, it can seem like the most topsy-turvy period of your life, right? But when you get far enough into it, it's also the most rewarding period of your life because you're doing a lot of deep work. So the foundation, really the foundation of every chart is right there in Ketu and Rahu. And I'm going to expand upon that. It's right there in Ketu and Rahu. It's right there in understanding where you've come from, what you're really comfortable with, where you have a strong foundation, but how you're perhaps limited and how you need to explore some other things so that you can develop yourself. And that's Rahu's job. Now, a really good way to understand this karmic path is to look at Ketu. Look at the sign that it's in. Okay? Let's say, for instance, I'm just going to make it up. Let's say, for instance, Ketu happens to be in Capricorn. Well, probably previous lifetimes you were very comfortable with managing your affairs in a very externally focused type of way. You were comfortable with trying to build material status and material security, right? So that you could have a nice, solid, secure material life. Well, that's okay, right? It's good to have that material security. But what if you have that material security and you're just not happy at all? You're unhappy within yourself, right? Then you need Rahu in Cancer. You need Rahu in Cancer to teach you about emotional security. You need Rahu in Cancer to teach you about being happy within yourself, finding that happiness within yourself, right? So then let's say, so Ketu's in Capricorn, right? How's Saturn doing? Okay, is Saturn in Aries? right? Well, unless Saturn's got his debility canceled, well, that probably meant that you may have had some sort of material security in a previous lifetime, but you had it because of being in a particular position where you were constantly holding yourself back, and maybe you wanted to do something really different, but you didn't really have the chance to do that, right? So, it was something that was a dead end, right? And so then you need to explore Rahu, how you can be happier within yourself. And so let's say Rahu is in Cancer and you've got an exalted moon, right? Well, that's kind of going to teach you that a lot of the true material security that you have, if it's tying in with the nodes, right? A lot of the true material security that you're going to have is going to be connected with being emotionally secure within yourself and not just based on material related circumstances, right? There has to be a balance of both. So, that's one way to understand it. So the lords of the nodes are very important to understand how the nodes are going to play out. But another good thing to do is to see what house cusps are being conjunct, right? So let's say you've got Rahu in Capricorn and it's in the 11th house. So a previous lifetime, you were able to just follow your inspirations and everything just kind of naturally came to you. And you got a lot of approval from your peers, people that, surrounded you. And so everything went pretty smoothly for you, especially if you had a strong Saturn, right? But you know what? You were doing it for peer approval, right? You were doing it to get recognition from your peers. Well, then this time Rahu in Cancer in the 5th house would be teaching you to follow that path just because it's inspiring to you. It's something that you find inspiration in, and it's something that you believe in. So also of equal importance to understand is the position of that ruling planet of the nodes from the nodes themselves and from the ascendant. Okay? So, for instance, we're talking about a particular instance where you've got Rahu in Capricorn and, Ketu in Capricorn, and it's in the 11th. And let's say you've got a nice, strong, exalted Saturn, and that Saturn is in Libra. Okay? So if you would be a Pisces ascendant. So you've got Pisces as your ascendant. You've got Ketu in the 11th in Capricorn. And you've got Saturn in the 8th from the ascendant and in the 10th from Ketu. Well, what that could mean is in a previous lifetime you had material security and stability, but there was a lot of upheaval through the 8th house to your position. You lost that position. You went through a transformation. You experienced some sort of problem with that, right? And so then, let's say you've got Rahu in Cancer directly opposite, and you've got that moon in, let's say that moon is instead in Leo, right? Let's say that moon is in Leo. It's in the 2nd house from Rahu, and it's going to be in the 6th from the ascendant. Well, as you're trying to develop emotional security and follow your own path of inspiration in this particular lifetime, you may encounter a lot of stress related to finances, or there can be a lot of stress and struggle with your family. And all of these things are background things that are going to affect other areas of your life. And if you deal, I didn't want to go too deeply into interpretation with this because I'm not here to really just wow you with my, astrological insight. And if you want me to do that, you can visit my book now button. No, I'm not going to be that way today. But if you want to, it is up there. But what I am here to do is to help you to understand the purpose of your chart and how, sure, you want to understand the answers to all those things about why career may not be going well, what career you should change to be happy, whether you should move to this home or that home, marry this person or that person. Well, in many cases, that happiness that you're going to find through that is only going to be temporal. if you're not going to deal with the root of what the problem is. And the root of that problem is tied in with the karmic implications in your chart. And that's why they're so very important, which is going to bring me to my next subject. And then after that, I'm going to kind of take some questions for a minute or two. But the highest use of astrology, is self-understanding. Okay? Predictions. Good astrologers can get very precise with predictions, especially using Vedic astrology. You can find some things that nobody would be able to really find, right? And give predictions that would be the hardest thing to give unless you were working with Vedic astrology, right? But even the best of astrologers are going to be inaccurate some of the time. We cannot perfectly predict every single aspect of a person's life. And why would somebody want to know every single aspect of their lives? It would make life kind of boring on a certain level. So I'm not saying prediction isn't important and that prediction doesn't serve a purpose. But I think that there is much more beneath the surface than that prediction. If anybody else is having problems seeing me, if I'm freezing on you, can you please let me know? Some people, it may be your own internet on your end. I've had problems on my end and it's cut in and out, but it seems to be stable here. So, you know, prediction has a purpose. The purpose is to deal with the moment. Is everybody still seeing me? I just saw something that said connected to my internet connection. And I hope I'm connected to my internet connection. I tell you what, I'm going to wait a second before I talk. But if people can see me talking, can you please let me know before I continue? So I'm not going to run my mouth and go more deeply into prediction and things like that until people are telling me they can see me. So perhaps a one-line sentence telling me that you're seeing what I'm saying and the connection is actually flowing. All right, I'm good. Right. So prediction, it's important to deal with the symptoms, right? Because if you're not dealing with the symptom, then you're not going to take that initial stress away so that you can get to the root of the problem. So it is important to deal with prediction. It does have a place, but if you consider the fact that there's always the potential that that astrologer can predict incorrectly, just as if you go to a doctor, there's always the potential that doctor can make the wrong diagnosis, right? You're going to get much more sound use out of astrology if you use it for self-understanding, if you use it for getting a deeper look at the karmic path that you're on and where you perhaps need to head in order to better your life, than you would from somebody just giving you a simple prediction, right? You know, I have had a lot of encounters with clients where they're getting caught up in the prediction aspect, wanting to know when this is going to get better and when that is going to get better. And really, when you get to the point of what is underneath their problem, through understanding the archetypes they're dealing with, understanding the areas in their life that are most deeply impacting it, then they're going to get a lot more out of what you're talking about. And when you actually get to that thing, when you get to that, what I like to call that leverage point, or the fulcrum point that lets you kind of leverage something, then all those other questions that they're having begin to become a lot more ephemeral. They're not really, they just kind of vanish out of the way, so to speak. And equally, I have found that people can have some sort of material problem, you know, unhappiness in marriage or unhappiness with finances. And you get to the root of the problem that they're having on the karmic level and you deal with that. And everything else in their life begins to miraculously improve. Their marriage starts getting better and everything just starts going a lot better because you know what the root of the problem is rather than just the surface of the problem. Okay, so I'm done with my porta pulpit for today. So, you know, if people have some questions, I may not be able to answer all of them. And I do want to tell people, because I'm seeing one question right now that's talking about a planet in Rahu in the 8th house alongside Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter, Rahu aspecting 12th house, where Moon, Venus, and Leo are in Leo. What can Rahu, Jupiter do here? I'm not going to go too deeply into questions like that because really, if I don't have your entire chart in front of me and I'm not going into the Varga charts to look at things, you're just going to get a surface answer, and that surface answer is not really going to help you that much. I think the types of questions I would like to take is not necessarily personal chart related questions, but more some, I would say, simpler astrology questions, because really I have to, kind of tell you that if I had a chart in front of my face, I have a clearer mental picture of that than me trying to close my eyes and imagine all these planets in all these different places, creating these different aspects. I can do that, but it's just a little more confusing, and it's only going to lead to inaccuracy. So I'm not avoiding your question, Fabiana. I just find that it would just kind of give some inaccuracy, and I don't want to give inaccuracy. So somebody asked, what is the importance of the house of Ketu and its dispositor? All of those things play a role. They're all very important. So Ketu, the house that Ketu is in, is going to give an overall insight of things. So let me tell you what I mean by that. So Ketu is in the 11th, as we were saying before. That means in the previous lifetime, overall, that individual was finding security through, so Ketu in Capricorn and in the 11th, that person is finding security in externally structured things through which they are getting feedback from their peers. So that's the importance of the house that Ketu is in. So the importance of where its dispositor is, like the house position from Ketu and the ascendant, would be the areas of life where that agenda of Ketu in the 11th is going to kind of play itself out through, right? So let's say that Saturn happened to be in Aquarius from Ketu, that's the 2nd. And let's say we're talking about a Leo ascendant, and that's going to put Ketu in the 7th. Well, that then basically that peer approval thing is going to also have an impact or play itself out through the person's relationship to their family, or their relationship to finances, or recognizing how important or how much they value a key relationship. All sorts of things like that, right? So all of those things play a part. And sometimes one factor takes on more importance than another, dependent upon if there's confluence that is showing the same thing in other areas of the chart. Okay, so it's kind of a mixed bag. It depends on what's more prominent and what's popping up more in the chart, right? It may be more family factors showing than there are 11th house and peer related things, and so then you may find that it's less associated with peers and more associated with an elder sibling, because you're dealing with family stuff. So somebody's asking, how do you see the difference between Rashi and Graha aspects on a more practical level as related to Dasha, etc.? I tell you what, can you do me a favor, please? And I'm willing to wait and go back to your question, but can you elaborate a little more deeply? Yeah, one thing I will say straight off the bat about that, and this is my theory, and I'm happy to say that this is how I work with things, and other people work with things in a different way, and that's their path. But what I have found is, if you are looking at Graha aspects in Varga charts, you're going to get a lot of inaccuracy, because the only astronomy that happens in the Varga charts is the astronomy that's represented in the Rashi chart. So what do I mean by that? Well, planetary aspects are an astronomical thing. So a planet is at this particular angle from another planet. That's an astronomical thing. So if one planet is aspecting, let's say you've got Saturn and Jupiter aspecting each other in the Rashi chart, and you happen to look in a Varga chart and it looks like, well, maybe, Saturn's in the 5th from Jupiter, which would be a planetary aspect in the Varga chart. The reason you're getting some accuracy with that is most likely due to the fact that the aspect is taking place in the Rashi chart, right? So real aspects, real planetary aspects, take place in the Rashi chart, I find, only. And then you want to transfer that over to the Varga chart, if you're looking at that. But the real aspect is in the Rashi chart. Okay, so if those two planets weren't really forming an aspect in the Rashi chart with each other, or if that aspect was minimum, and you were trying to read that particular planetary aspect in the Varga chart, you'd likely find that that planetary aspect wasn't really turning out to be so accurate or present. And why? Because the aspect isn't there in the Rashi chart to support it. Okay, so another question. So that's one way I like to kind of explain some of the differences between Rashi aspect and planetary aspects. Planetary aspects are an actual astronomical thing. Now, if you are looking at the Varga charts, you can do Rashi aspects. But what's going on with the Rashi aspect is one Rashi is aspecting another. One Rashi is aspecting another. The planet in that Rashi is having its energy focused by that Rashi, and that Rashi is aspecting another Rashi and impacting the planet that's in it. But those two planets are not really aspecting each other. Okay, that's one way I like to talk about that side of it. Two more questions I'll handle, and then I have to go because I have a client. So somebody said, how about planetary conjunctions in Varga charts? The planetary conjunctions in Varga charts many times will take place dependent, and I'm going to stress, dependent upon the proximity of the conjunction. So let's say you've got two planets, and they're within 30 minutes of arc of each other in the Rashi chart. They're conjunct. That conjunction is going to carry over into, pretty much every single Varga chart. But let's say if that conjunction is not that close, you've got a conjunction, or let's say you don't have a conjunction between those planets in the Rashi chart, but they're conjunct in the Varga chart, that's not really... Hello, back again. It froze for a second. What I was saying is if you've got two planets that aren't conjunct each other in the Rashi chart, but they're in the same sign in the Varga chart, that's not really a conjunction. That's two planets conjuncting a Rashi, but they're not necessarily conjuncting each other. That Rashi will focus both of those planets' energy so that it actually feels like a conjunction of those two planets, but what it actually is the Rashi focusing the energy of those two planets, which are both in that sign. But it's not technically, in terms of a planetary aspect or a planetary conjunction, a conjunction, because if you were to look up in the sky, those two planets may not be in the same section of the sky. So it's not a conjunction of those two planets because it's an astronomical thing. So somebody had asked a question earlier. So they said, what about Rashi aspect of benefic, malefic? The same as a graha. Well, in terms of planetary aspects and benefics and malefics, it's going to depend on the intensity of the planetary aspect, which you don't just want to use the full drishti aspects. You want to look at the aspects which are measured on a range of 0 to 60 rupas, right? In terms of Rashi aspects, if you've got a malefic, a lot of it's going to depend on the dignity of that particular planet, because a malefic, which I prefer to use the word a cruel planet rather than a malefic, because it's not necessarily that it's bad, it's just that it achieves its agenda in a very harsh manner. But if that Krura planet or cruel planet is exalted, it's going to have a good impact, right? But it will be achieved through harsh measures. If that cruel planet is debilitated, it's going to create a lot of problems. I'm not really sure if that's the nature of your question, but that's how I would, kind of quantify the aspects of benefics and malefics in terms of Rashi aspects and planetary aspects. Planetary aspects, it's going to depend upon the intensity of the aspect. It's equally going to depend on the dignity of the planet as well. All sorts of different factors. Great. So I guess that answered your question. But anyway, thanks everybody for being here today. I do have to go because I do have a client. Just a reminder, there is a book now button above for those of you who might want to book a service with me. And I will talk to you all soon. I'll try to be back on here sometime soon, schedule allowing. I'm kind of a little bit behind with things and needing to catch up. Bye now.